Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Good Food Gathering. We're so glad you could join us. I'm going to start with our land honoring. As we begin to gather, we must honor the lands and waters of this place we call home and formally recognize the original peoples who care for this place and have done so since time out of mind. We show our gratitude to the Lekwungen, the modern-day Songhees and Esquimalt nations, to the WSÁNEĆ nations of Tsartlit, Pakwachin, Tseycum, as well as the Chownu, Suk, Pachidat, Malahat, and Penelakut nations. My name is Linda Geige, and I'm of Irish and Scottish ancestry, a white settler on these unceded lands. My ancestors came uninvited here and brought with them a colonial system that now dominates these lands. This has resulted in the destruction and even criminalization of original foodways. As we gather here today, we're looking for new ways forward. This network, the Good Food Network, acknowledges that the harm has occurred and continues to occur and is committed to change. So what are we doing? The Good Food leadership is taking the time to listen, learn, unlearn, and educating themselves, providing resources and training to network members to learn about and address Indigenous anti-racism, systemic racism, and whiteness, and the devastating and harmful impacts. We see it as our responsibility to create shifts and space for First Nations-led and self-determined food sovereignty and ecosystem protection and preservation. We work as part of the new trust-based philanthropy model towards this responsibility. We are listening and taking the time to reflect on our ways of knowing and doing and how colonization has informed our practice. We are committed to learn and unlearn and understand, take action on dismantling the harm that dominant settler food systems and systems have done to invisibilize and benefit from First Nations homelands. We are committed to continue to learn and take daily committed steps to decolonize our minds, our thoughts, communications, and actions. And today, as we gather, we continue in the critical work to listen to and learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being, starting off with our first session of the Good Food Gathering and listening to the land. We want to acknowledge the important guidance and leadership of Gay Smith in bringing this together and acknowledge the welcome and support of the Songhees First Nation for the gathering in their territories. I thank you all in advance for holding this gracious space of learning and challenging ourselves over the next few days. To guide us on our journey, I want to introduce our MC, what I would refer to as our muse of ceremonies. She is a force of the universe, a gifted thinker, and an inspiration to all of those around her. Assia Robinson. Assia was born and raised on the ancestral lands of the Arawak and Lakayan peoples, Grand Bahama Island. She moved to the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people over 6 years ago to pursue a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and chemistry at the University of Victoria. Since being here, she has been an avid community member, actively using her voice to work against anti-Muslim and anti-Black sentiment. She is a recent recipient of the 2021 Honorary Citizen Award in Victoria, BC. Assia works independently as an equity and anti-racism consultant for local organizations, focusing on improving workplace culture and hiring practices. She hopes to aid in the creation of more inclusive spaces, and she has been engaging with peer-to-peer outreach, harm reduction, and other trauma-informed care for many unhoused populations across the island. Assia has been an integral member of the EA Creative Community, an initiative dedicated to Black sovereignty, primarily through food access, grounding their work in local Indigenous ways of knowing in regards to land stewardship and protection. She is passionate about spirituality, ancestral foods, self-autonomous communities, and music, and is constantly working to decolonize her thoughts, actions, and processes. Throughout all of her community engagements and projects, her primary focus is to connect with, listen to, and learn from underrepresented communities to influence necessary systemic change. We're so fortunate to have her here as our MC for the 2021 Good Food Gathering. And I really wanted you to learn a little bit about her because she's such a special person and so important to all of us in all of our work. Here is Asiya. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Completely unexpected. I never know but I really thank you so much for giving me this space. And Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name's Asiya Robinson, and I'm so grateful and honored to be your MC today for the 2021 Good Food Gathering. I identify as an Afro-Caribbean Muslim woman, born and raised on the Arawak and Taino Indigenous lands, and I moved to Lekwungen territory, like it was said, just over 6 years ago. And I remember when I first moved here, not truly feeling a sense of belonging. I remember trying to figure out, and how do I find that? And a lot of that had to do around food and food connection and what food meant to me. When I was a kid, we would, in the summers, always have mango season. And I fully remember looking at trees as they overarched people's like fences and houses because they were just inundated with mangoes and mangolas, ripe and beautiful and ready for our consumption. And we would pick some, go outside, sit on the porch, and we would just munch. And it would drip down our chins, our hands, our elbows, an absolute mess. Obviously, our parents ate them a lot cleaner than we did, but that's what food was to me. It was an opportunity for us to connect, an opportunity for us to come together, to be able to build relations, to have conversation. I knew the seasons, and it wasn't something that I knew that I needed to find belonging. And so I'm so grateful to all of my Indigenous friends who've now become kin here on Lekwungen territory, and that stretches all the way to Kla'amin up on the Coast Salish territories and everyone in between, because I've learned so much about what it means to be in relationship to the land, about why that's so integral to being and existing and what that means and how I identify with that. And I'm so grateful for that knowledge because I'm going home in December for the first time in years. And I'm so excited to make intentional and meaningful reconnection with my homelands. Today, no matter how you show up to this conversation, whether a community advocate, whether you are a policymaker, whether you're someone trying to connect to your ancestral roots through the earth, or simply someone who eats a lot of food, this gathering is for you. And I'm so excited that we're all coming together to hold dialogue around just food systems. What does that look like? Holding dialogue around connection, building relationships, around the current projects and initiatives that exist kind of across this island, and how we can get involved and how we can support one another, how we can build reciprocity between all of the different things that we're doing, talking about barriers and how we can break some of those things down. What are the things that people are existing between? What are the known and unknown barriers, and how can each of us and collectively work to break those down? And hopefully work to answer that question about what does a just, land-centered, sustainable, and healthy food system look like? The theme of this year is listening to the land, and it's so, so important for us to really sit and think about that. That will be our first panel for today, and I hope that all of us will collectively and individually think about, what does it mean for me to listen to the land? How do I build relationship with the land? How do I build relationship to a land that I am a visitor or a guest, unwelcomed, a settler on? How do I build relationship with a land as a child who had connection to a land from a home that I'm no longer have access to, or a home that I haven't been to in a while? And what does that mean? There's so much that we have to do. There's so much that we can learn from Indigenous peoples. And one of the most beautiful things about being here on these lands, I saw reflected within Indigenous ways of beings, as well as my spiritual practices around land stewardship, land protection, and not ownership, not cultivation, but reciprocity in relationship. And so just before we get started with our amazing panel, I would love to take the time to really thank our sponsors. I'd love to thank the Victoria Foundation, the Vancouver Foundation, and the Horner Foundation for their incredible work in getting us here and getting us to gather. Places like these are so important, and we cannot do that without our sponsors. In addition to that, I'd love to thank all of you who I'm looking at right now, all of our attendees coming together, thinking that this is a conversation you want to be a part of, you want to have knowledge that you know that you need, that's integral to whatever way that you show up on this earth. And I think I really also want to thank everyone who's a presenter today, whether you're coming as an organization, association, a social enterprise, or an individual who's sharing your lived and learned experiences, the knowledge that you've cultivated over the years for us to hold dialogue with each other. We're on Zoom, so this is our Zoom. And so I want to make sure, please make sure you're muted when you come into the conversation, so that we're not disrupting presenters when they're giving us all the amazing facts and all the amazing conversations that we want to hear. But populate the chat. Answer it and put it with questions and inquiries and anything else that you want to fill it with. Be a part of the dialogue, and you can do that through the chat. It will be monitored, and we'll be sure that your reflections go somewhere, and it's a really great place for all of you to engage. In addition to that, all of these sessions are recorded, and so if you don't want to grace us with your beautiful faces, you can always turn your camera off so that you're not caught up in the recording. If you're having any technical difficulties, because I always do, we do have tech support. And if there's any other issues that you're having around any of these events, please make sure that you email engagement at crfair.ca, and they'll be able to help you try to figure out whatever it is you need to know. We have a hybrid event happening, and so we have Zoom events as well as in-person events, and so they're going to be happening. And when it comes to Zoom, all of the links have been sent to you by email. If you're anything like me and you can forget what sessions you're signed up for, thankfully, yesterday we all got an email of all the really amazing sessions that we decided on, and they have the Zoom links as well as the locations. If you're going to any in-person events because you're leaving your home or your office spaces to come and enjoy the outdoors with the rest of us, please make sure that you bring your vaccine passport and you bring your ID, as they're needed for participation and entry into all of our in-person events. In addition to that, make sure that you are masked, which I don't have on right now, but make sure you're masked, and make sure that you're also keeping social distancing. We'd love to see you out there. If you are anything like me as well, and for whatever reason, can't find your emails when you actually need it, there's always the attendees only page that you can go to if you go on the 2021 Good Food Gathering landing page, and you can find all of the needed links and addresses there as well. The code for that is food for all capital letters, no spaces, and that's where you can find all the information that you need. I'm pretty sure that's kind of it for all of our housekeeping. But once again, if you have any questions or any concerns, you can always email engagement@crfair.ca. With that, I'd love to bring us back and just really dive into one of these most amazing conversations that we're setting the stage with. Like I said, this year's theme is listening to the land. And it's so important that we have a conversation around it, because I think when we talk a lot about the land, and we're talking about, Mother Earth, when we're talking about our brother trees, we're talking about the grandfather sky, we're talking about all these things, and we're talking about their life force and their essence, sometimes that sounds really nebular. And people are like, I get it, but I don't really get it. What does that look like? But it doesn't have to be an intangible concept. It's something that we can all connect to. And so what's really amazing today is that we're going to have a conversation around listening to the land. And we're going to hear from some food justice advocates and community members around what building a reciprocal and deep relationship with the land looks like. And hopefully we'll be able to reflect and take some of that away and identify with that and figure out, well, how can I, Asiya, you yourself, build that relationship deeper, or even start that relationship? And we'll also be talking about the importance of centering Indigenous knowledge and what that means when we're talking about an equitable food system, and when we're talking about food and land justice and food systems and land back and everything that intertwines and interconnects when we're talking about these things. Land is something that we protect, we steward, and let's be real, there's a food system that existed long before any of us were here, and we just really need to tap into that. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand this panel over to Lajah, everybody will introduce themselves, and we'll kind of get started with these really meaningful discussions. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you soon.
It's great to everyone. Good day. It's good to see you all here. And thank you, Asiya, for opening us in such a beautiful way. I think that it really frames this conversation in a great way, and it really summarizes what the goal is today in this panel, and really understanding these key concepts that we're going to be talking about and that you'll be hearing about throughout this whole event. Like Asiya said, the theme is listening to the land, and I think for many of us, it's a lot easier said than done. So I'm really excited to dive into that more. And I'm also really excited about this panel because I'm not just sitting among people that I hold at such high regard, but quite a bit of family members in this panel as well, which is really exciting to have a panel and a unique conversation like this as well. And I really thank you all for coming and being so generous with the knowledge you have. And I'm really excited to dive more into this conversation. And so for the next hour, we're going to be sharing a conversation that's really focused on slowing down and working to understand these key concepts of listening to the land and applying it to your work and bringing it back to your communities. And like I said, through this, you can reflect on how this impacts you and your work, but also personally in your life and what you can bring in for personal practices as well. And the goal with this is that unless we sit down and really collect collective understandings of what listening to the land means and what that looks like, we're all going to be going at this work with separate goals and separate intentions painted by our own perceptions, which is really important for us to come together and share what that means to each other and create some sort of collective understanding there. So that's my goal with this panel and a little bit of the behind the scenes. And I say a collective understanding and not definition, as I recognize that each person's meaning of what listening to the land is very different and very dependent on where you come from and your families. But I'm hoping to create a collective understanding here so that we can really create common goals for each other. And so for today, we're going to do quick introductions. I'll introduce myself as the facilitator of this panel, and I'll give a chance for all the other panelists to introduce themselves as well. And then we're going to be breaking down 3 key concepts within this conversation and really breaking down what it means to one another and a little bit of why we see things the way we do and where these thoughts come from for us. And then we'll do a quick closing and give you some things that you can think about when you go into the rest of the event and all the other workshops that you'll be going on today. And so before I give the mic to the panelists, I'll introduce myself quickly as the facilitator. My name is Lajah Warren, and on my father's paternal side, we're from Songhees and Esquimalt nations through the Warren and the Albany family groups. And on my father's maternal side, we are mostly Cree, Ojibwe, Métis, and French. And on my mother's side, we are mostly English, Icelandic, and of French descent. And I wanted to start with that because I think that that's really what frames the work I do, and my families and the teachings that they've given to me really frame and guide where I take my work and the teachings that I bring forward in my work. And I've always had a really deep connection with land since I was very young. And I found a lot of comfort in natural spaces, and that's really been a big guide in my creative process as an artist, but then also in my work, as I'm now a youth and family counselor working for Songhees Education. And within that, I have training as a nature-based counselor as well. So I bring a lot of nature-based healing and that lens to my work and bring that into the approaches that I work with young people. And previously I worked with CR Fair and the people that organized this event doing youth engagement work. And so within that, I did a lot of youth engagement to create youth food justice groups. I created podcasts for youth to share the work that they're doing and be inspired by each other. And I've also had some grants for young people to further connect with land and really honor them for learning rather than always being the people that are doing things, is really honoring that learning process as well and providing them funding to do that further and take that to the next step. And so that was a lot of talking for me. I would love to hand it over to one of the panelists if you'd be able to introduce yourself in whatever way feels right to you and maybe share a bit about the work you do and how it relates to this conversation today.
I'll go first. So illuminates, SÄNÄ, SÄNÄ, Tseycum Thunamain, Wendy Thunatain, Tseycum Elulungs, Helixon Quinstachel. I just said my name is Sarah Jim. I'm from the SÄNÄ Nation from the Tseycum village. I introduced my parents. My dad's name is David, and he is of Coast Salish and Mexican descent. And my mom's name is Wendy. She's Russian Jewish. And yeah, I like to honor my ancestry as well because it does frame my perspective. And I love what you said about Lajah, about not always focusing on doing, but also on learning. Because as an adult, I'm learning so much. And I always loved nature, but I never knew much about it. And so as an adult, while working on the land, I'm learning more and more every day. And so I work with PEPÁŽA EՆ HÁUTW, which means blossoming place in SÄNÄ, and we're based at the tribal school in Brentwood. We're a native plant and garden nursery. So we create curriculum for kids to, attain knowledge about planting like garden variety plants, but also about native plants. And we incorporate SÄNÄ, and they're really cute, and we do restoration with them. And so our main restoration site is in SNÍIDÐEÐEÐ� or Todd Inlet, which is the first SÄNÄ village site right beside Butch Art Gardens. And so I've been down there for 4 years conducting restoration and learning on the land, and pretty much just asking questions and being more grounded in community, which has been really helpful for me. I actually have an art degree from the University of Victoria, so not trained institutionally in ethnobotany, but I've learned everything, like I said, on the land and in community. So I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for having me. Hi, Shka.
Hi, Shka, Sarah. Thank you for adding to that around listening and what it means to learn as well. And I hope that that's going to be a big theme as we continue our conversation today, is to really slow down and not just always feel like we have to go and act, but also take time to critically think about what we're doing and continuously learn as well. I think that's very important. Thank you. Does any of the other panelists want to step forward?
Hi, Lajah. Pardon me. I find it a little bit hard to be asked like in that way when we're doing introductions, because I want to let other people have turns. But good morning, everybody. It's Beangka Elliot. My name is Beangka Elliot. I'm from the SÄNÄC Nation. On my dad's side, his name is Charles Elliot. You might have seen some of his artwork around Victoria. He's a master carver and artist. On my mom's side, I'm from Songhees and SNIDÐEÐEÐ� nations. Yeah, I'm here today on the panel with family. Lajah is my cousin, and my uncle is also here. So also come from the Albany and Warren family. And yeah, it's also nice to be here with Sarah, who is a friend and somebody that I've been able to work with. I'll just share a little bit about who I am and yeah, why I'm here today. I have grown up learning from my family since a child about our SÄNÄ language in SÄNÄC, the stories connected to our traditional territories, the different plants in our territories, and yeah, just all of those connections and stories and things that have been passed down generation to generation, which make up like our natural law system. So I'm really fortunate that my family is rich that way. And in more recent years, in the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time trying to share those stories with other people, trying to share about, our traditional foods and medicine. So I do a lot of place-based learning and workshop-based learning, so that more people can understand, from the plant being harvested to bring it into your home to actually using it in everyday use, to kind of make those things full circle with all of our stories that are connected to those things. And then also I've done a lot of project work around restoration. So one of the restoration projects that I founded was Project Reclaim, which was a youth food justice project for Indigenous youth in SÄNÄC to reclaim land, identity, and culture in ways that felt good for them, and to be mentored to do so. So that was kind of my baby project, and made a lot of connections that way. And my biggest passion or my favorite plant is camas. It was a food staple in our territories here. And yeah, I just feel really drawn to that plant. In SÄNÄC, it's called tla'l. And one of my favorite pastimes is doing pit cooks. So that's our traditional way of cooking camas. I love all of the species that grow in Garry Oak meadows or tla'l meadows. And more recently, I'm now working for Parks Canada as a partnering and engagement coordinator, and I'm working on the Sea Garden project or Clam Garden restoration project. So that's who I am, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Beangka. Yeah, I love following the work you do, because I feel like I'm always so inspired by it, and I get so much guidance from looking at the things you're doing and try and take notes of some of those things. And I really appreciate you sharing. And I'm excited to have this panel. Like you said, it's lots of family members and friends, which is a really great way to have a panel. And I really hope that it's based around more of a conversation and less of a panel, and we can really engage with each other and have just a casual conversation about some of these things. Lastly, I'd love, Mark, if you would be able to introduce yourself today too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not familiar with computers or any of this. This is the first time I've done this, so please bear with me. Mark Albany from Songhees, and I am not part of any kind of food group or agricultural group or anything like that. So my whole thing with this is that through the schools, I would take kids out for walks through various parks and talk about the parks. So that'd be SNIDÐEÐEÐ�, Mount Doug, Gold Stream, what have you, places like that. But with that, my knowledge of Victoria, surrounding areas, has come as being very experiential. Literally, I've watched Victoria and all the old hunting areas just disappear through all the development, all those kinds of things. And because I'm an avid hiker, walker, and have gone out and worked and played around in the woods, I've learned about something of the environment. So, and with that, you know, presenting around the flora and fauna and geography of the area. So I'm looking at things not so much as in I'm doing gardening or I've done gardening or any of those kinds of things. It's watching the demise of our geographical area. And so the history of the area is what I'm more familiar with. So that's, I may have lost you.
You're still here. You're good.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened to the computer. It just all of a sudden it's going, introducing Zoom apps. Get started. So I don't know where this is right now. You still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So I don't know where the computer is or what's going on with all this, but I'll just continue on talking. My experiences are probably a bit more depressing than the way that other people are looking at it. I look at Langford and I look at areas around, and people say, yes, we are connecting with the land. Well, my image of the land is that actually we're kind of sitting in a bit of a garbage can. So anyhow, I'm not too sure how I'm going to be able to help with all of this, but I'm here to sort of help out whatever way. Am I still there?
You are, yes.
Oh, good. Because right now this thing is going, please launch meeting.
I've never heard of that before during a meeting.
Well, this is the thing that with me and computers, it's a frustration. So anyhow, continue on.
Well, with a Zoom meeting this big too, I understand it comes with many
Oh, there you are.
complications as well.
You're back again.
You're back? Good. Okay.
Oh, all
Can
right.
you hear me okay as well?
I can.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you joining today. And I know you said that your path has not been as much focused on gardening and agriculture, but I think that that's exactly why we invited you here, because when we talk about land, it's so much more than just that. And especially when we talk about listening to the land, it's not just listening about the good things, but it's also listening to the fact that the land has changed. And there's been a lot of change. And I think that your perspective brings so much to that. And so I'm really excited to have you here today. To have you all here today. I'm very, very excited for this conversation. And if we're ready, I'll just move right on into it then and get started with the 3 conversation themes that we're going to be focused on today. And so, like I said before, listening to the land is a really big statement and means something different for us all. So my hope is for us to really reflect on what those words means and break down those key concepts within that, so that we can build it back together again and have a good understanding of what those words mean together as well. And so within this conversation today, we're going to be talking about what we mean when we say land, what it truly means to listen and what does that look like, and then also look at community collaboration and really dive into that and how that ties to listening to the land as well. And so to start that today, I wanted to start by talking about land. And, like I already talked a little bit about, and like what Mark already said, a lot of people, when they talk about food, they think of, colonial agriculture systems or grocery stores. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And for me, there's no separation between food and land. And one thing that comes to my mind when I think of land is our transformation stories that explain that, we're constantly transforming from plants and people and animals. And so I see each animal or plant or thing around me as a family member. And so for me, that's really framed the way I approach food and land with more of more love and seeing that as family. And then also it changes the way I approach the food on my plate as well, with deep honor and respect. I see that as family, and I see that's what happened, and what it took to get to that place and be on my plate today is really important. So I want to start this conversation a bit by looking more of, when we talk about land, what comes to mind for the panelists. And this may be guided through your experiences growing up and how you've been informed of your connection with land. Some of the key people that helped inform how you connect with land, or your personal definition of land, or how land has changed in your perspective. So there's lots of ways to take this conversation, as I know we have all very different perspectives and guides in our work. And I will do it in order now that I see all your heads next to each other, so that might be easier, so you don't have to mute and unmute. If you're okay with starting, Sarah.
Sure, yeah, hi Shka. Where to start? So I mentioned that I didn't have the fortune to grow up knowing all this traditional knowledge, and I'm learning as an adult. And so I just want to acknowledge some mentors that have been in my life. They're mostly women, which is kind of following the tradition of matriarchs and women knowledge keepers. So Beangka is one of them. We were working together at SNÍIDÐEÐEÐ� in my early years, and I really look up to Beangka and all the work she does in the community and on the land. And the way you speak about, you just hold so much wisdom that I really admire, Beangka. So Hajka for that. And then my friends and colleagues at PEPÁÁEÂ Cooper and Judith Lynn Arney have been really good, valuable mentors to me. PEPÁÁEA is a Tsimshian speaker, and Judith knows a lot about how ecosystems work. And then our elder, Earl Claxton Jr., who works with us, is very knowledgeable and so kind. And my family, my elders and community have taught me a lot. Everyone's really open about sharing their knowledge with me. Like I said, I ask lots of questions, and I think that's a really valuable tool for anyone who wants to learn. Like, never be afraid to ask, especially when you're around knowledgeable people. Tiffany Joseph, who I used to work with, a friend of mine, she's quite knowledgeable as well, and I really value her. But yeah, when you mentioned listening to the land, I first off thought of like physically listening to the land. So when I am in a forest and I hear birds and frogs and all this life around, you can kind of feel that the land is kind of more alive. But when you're in the city, you don't hear that. And so trying to mitigate or enhance these wildlife noises is really helpful. Kind of lost my train of thought for a second. I'm still not used to talking to a computer, even after all this time, but it's helpful when I see you all nodding. So that's great. So I just wanted to acknowledge my mentors at first. And then when we're doing restoration in SNÍIDÐＥÐEÐ�, we really do listening to the land approach. And so for the most part, we're taking out invasive species. And so when we do this, sometimes, hopefully most times, native plants will just naturally come back because there's a seed bank underneath. And so we're really trying to accommodate for that ecosystem. So if we're in a forest, we're not going to plant camas, we're going to do ecosystem appropriate plants, just because we're observing what's growing and we're listening to what that place wants to be. And so if these natural native plants don't come back, then we'll supplement with native seeds and plantings. So that's just one way to do it, is just really being observational. And I feel like that's how a lot of this traditional knowledge was, figured out, or all these technologies were developed, was just having that relationship with the place. So I will pass it back to you, Lajah. Haichka.
Haichka, Sarah. I think that's so beautiful. And what I hear from what you say is that what's really sticking out to me is that when you take away the barriers that are stopping Indigenous land and plants to grow, then they grow abundantly, which is so symbolic and can be applied to so much of what we're saying today. And I really think there's a lot there, and we could have a whole conversation about that as well. Thank you. Beangka, would you be able to step forward virtually?
Yeah, of course. When I think about land, I think about land from the lens of the stories that have been shared with me, and just how much has changed. And one of the stories that I share very often is that when my late grandpa Dave was a young boy, with his mother and auntie paddling across the border and into the Gulf Islands, or I guess San Juan Islands at night, he was told by his mom and auntie to be quiet, and that was out of respect for Coqualamachin, or the killer whale, or orca. And my uncle John Elliot, or Tseycum, as he's known, also shared about how different the land was when he was a boy, and that he could run through the field, and that there was just so many butterflies that, like, as he'd run, like, the butterflies would be flying out, like, in front of him, and covering, like, the shorelines. And think about some of the settler accounts too of what the landscape looked like. So if we think about where downtown Victoria is, there was Fort Victoria, and there was a map that showed from Fort Victoria to where UVic is now, that you could walk from those 2 points and not pass a single tree, which tells you about what the land looked like. And that meant that those areas were entirely Garry Oak meadows, or Garry Oak savannas, and they would have been so abundant and beautiful, and those were places that were cultivated by our people. And kind of think about the way that the world was when I was a child. Like, I spent a lot of time outside, and just how much it's changed. But I think we need to remember those stories that have been shared with us, and it's really important. And just being out in the Gulf Islands in the summer, like, I heard from people about, like, what it looked like, and something that people really noticed is that kelp forests are disappearing, and that when they boat through the southern Gulf Islands, they're just shocked that those large kelp forests are gone. And so we're living in a changing landscape, but we need to remember how it was before, and try to, you know, do our work through that lens. And I just think that, yeah, the stories are so important. Like, there's so many stories in our communities about transformation that was brought up. So our creation stories, and I think that all of those things are really grounding, and they bring us connection. And I think that's something that we can all do, no matter what culture you're from. You know, the stories from SÄNEĆ that I know, they make me feel connected. And we have a teaching in our communities that the land remembers. And so we all have that opportunity to show up. And the word for land in SÄNÄ is tanoch, which translates to land and water. There isn't a distinction. And that also tells something, that, you know, there wasn't like one more valuable than the other. We're saltwater people. We spent a lot of time on our canoes and out on the water, and a lot of the place names are named from the perspective of being on the water and on a canoe. So yeah, I just want to share that kind of perspective of remembering those stories, and the connection we can have to those places. And if you have the opportunity to, you know, sit and listen to the people around you, kind of no matter who it is, because we all have something to share, and we all have our own experiences in these territories. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it.
Thank you, Beangka. Yeah, when you share the stories that you did, especially the one around the butterflies, you know, within myself, I hold both like a deep like beauty, and I feel like uplifted by it, but it's also holding that space for like that sorrow too, and like seeing that change is really powerful. And I think it's really important to share those stories. And one thing that I think about is that not many people do know those stories of the history of this land, and so they don't know how the land could be, and what could grow here. And that's really scary to think about, that no one really knows like why we're doing this work and why we have to fight for this, because, you know, the land is changing, and you know, we know that, and we know the stories. And so I really appreciate you sharing what you did around that. Mark, would you be able to share on the topic of what land means to you? Oh, you're muted.
How's that?
You're good. Awesome.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Give me guidelines and I'll try and follow them as best as I can. I listened to what yourself, the other two speakers have said, and the things that they talk about, they hear stories of how the land has changed. They listen to grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not that old. So being born in 53, it really isn't that old. The interesting thing, though, is that in my lifetime, just my lifetime, and so with that, I've seen all these changes, from the fact of just around around Songhees, we used to have quail, we used to have pheasants, there used to be thousands of ducks that would run through there and through the gorge and fly over. They would be over in the golf course, eating acorns, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in mom and dad's backyard, there would be maybe 20. We used to have up to 500 come in winter time. The idea of preserving lands, fish, all those kinds of stuff. The Inner Harbor used to have cod, bass, herring come through there. There's yes, salmon, and there's still some herring come in there, but they're meager to what they used to be. Everything is being inundated by various and sundry invasive species. And now with global warming, we have many new species that are coming in. The idea of people thinking that we can live off the land from nature around us is from our old foods and from all those kinds of things. Songhees people could never do that anymore because our land base is gone. The land base that we had, which is all of Greater Victoria, big part of SÁNEĆ, all those kinds of things, it's all gone. It's all under cement. And so when I listen to these kinds of things, and it's sorely depressing. The idea right now, interestingly enough, because deer are adaptable, they live very well in town. However, as being a hunter, so going out into the woods, the biology department right now is from Malaspina is doing a study on the animals in the Duncan area. So from beginning of hunting season, which is September through till now, they've had 1,000 hunters through there. With that, there's only been 22 deer taken out of there, which you think of all the hours of energy and time going out looking for those deer and only getting 22 deer. That is pretty abysmal in the senses of animals, why, food, all those kinds of things. So what I'm basically saying is that in my short lifetime, from 53 till now, the decline in all the areas, the food, the animals, the fish, shellfish, we cannot harvest shellfish in anywhere in this area, from Victoria all the way around to SÁNEĆ, Salt Spring, because they're all poisoned. So I look at this and I go, yes, these projects that people are doing are good, but it's going to need a lot more buy-in from the world in order to get us anywhere back to what it may have been. Our demise of area has been so huge. Anyhow, I could ramble on, but yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Hey, Uncle Mark, just thinking about some of the things that you said, and it is going to be like so hard. Like we could never get back to where things were before. And, now we're looking at adaptive management and adaptive management in a climate crisis. And, when we have those stories, and maybe not everyone has those stories as well. And like that loss is just kind of scary, because I think about my kids, and if they can't harvest clams and they don't get to eat clams, then they're not going to hear those stories, and they're not going to understand that connection. And I think yeah, it's a little bit frightening to to see things disappearing so rapidly, and really feel or like, yeah, feel connected to some of those things that you said. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. That's, I think, a big reminder for us all that, you know, listening to the land isn't a pretty easy thing. It's hard. And when you're listening, you realize that there's a lot going on, and it's really scary. And I always think about how I was taught that, you know, I'm supposed to be thinking of the future children to come too. And that's what scares me the most, is thinking that that's only within your life, Mark. And that's a really scary thought of how that's going to impact the future children. And, you know, the stories that are being told, I think that's such a big point, that the stories will be adapting, and the stories that will be told are going to change. Does anyone have any other responses they have to this topic before we move to the next one? Any comments that you have to say?
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Mark. It's really good to acknowledge, you know, the reality we live in, although it is devastating and sad to think about. You know, we have to spread awareness of what is possible and what is happening now. But for my generation, I find it really helpful to do restoration, because it's this tangible activity that is feasible, and we can work towards it collectively. And if we all do something like that, then I feel like, you know, working together is the right step forward. So I just wanted to share that if anyone's feeling like eco-anxiety, and it's really easy to feel helpless and hopeless, but when you're doing something that's even just little, like, you know, not buying that plastic bag, it kind of gives you a slightly more empowerment than just kind of waiting for the world to end. So I just wanted to give advice on just being productive and being positive, because I know that for me it's hard sometimes, but just being on the land, it reminds you that there's possibilities. And also just working with the youth has been really hopeful for me as well, because, you know, sometimes they come down and they're too cool for school and they don't want to be there, but I was like that too. And so there's possibilities for youth to come around and see the light, I guess. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I do agree. There needs to be some hope, and, you know, doing those things and being able to actually do something is often that piece that's missing. And I know that's when, especially with the young people I work with, that's when they get trapped, is that eco-anxiety of there's nothing I can do, it's too far gone. But yes, giving them those tangible things that they can do is so helpful, and feeling like you have some power within that. Does anyone have any other comments they want to share before we move on? Okay. Yeah, one thing I wanted to share too, something that really stuck with me that a community member shared with me, was that if you don't have a connection with land, then you won't defend it. And that totally framed the way I did a lot of my work. And I really, really hold that teacher with high regards. And so I really appreciate that wisdom. And I think about that a lot. And I think about how when I am feeling discouraged and overwhelmed with the change in our environment and the land's dramatic changes within my world as well, it's interesting because how I cope with that is by going on the land. And that really reminds me of, like, that is where the healing and that source of growth comes from for me. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing as well, that connecting with land can be hard, but it's also what heals me to continue doing that work as well, and think about all the work that's to come as well, and helps me stay strong to do that. And so that's a great segue into the next topic, which is listening. And I think that we've touched on that quite a bit. And I think that it's wonderful that the gathering chose that word when we talk about listening to the land, because I think that that really holds a certain level of responsibility within that. And when I think about listening to the land, I think about truly honoring that relationship that I have with land, and knowing that the land teaches me so much about our values and myself, and how to care for myself as well, and so much more. And I'm really mindful of how I listen to the land and show the land that I'm listening. And I think of it like when we talk to someone we know in person, we show them that we're listening, and they can tell we're listening by how we respond to them, you know, by nodding our heads or the words we say. And with land, it's a little different because we don't have that same ability to show that we're listening. So I think that it's a really beautiful conversation for us to have around what does it actually mean to listen to the land, and how can we show the land that we're listening. So that's my question to you all, is what can we do to show the land that we're listening and give back to the land for what the land has showed you and shared with you. And also, if you have any suggestions for the audience as well, as how they can show the land that they are listening to what's being shown to them from the land. And I will ask, maybe we'll go the other way, so we'll mix it up this time. Mark, if you'd be able to start this conversation. Oh, you're just muted. Oh, Mark, you just muted. You have to press the little mute button in the left corner.
There it is, just came up. Okay,
Perfect.
good. Try not to touch the computer. Well, listening to the land. Well, in order to listen to the land, the first thing is you got to get familiar with the land. As you've discovered, I'm not into technology. And that's one of the biggest things, is getting away from technology. You know, I look at what my dad did. And so he was a hunter, fisherman, all that kind of stuff. But he also just wore the old Mackinac jeans and wool pants and all that kind of stuff. Present day, we have all this Gore-Tex. I'm going, where is he going with this? When you are out, and you're out in the forest, you're out in the woods, and you're cold and you're wet and you're miserable, and the wind is driving through all your wet clothes, you get a whole different appreciation for the animals, the fish, everything around you. You get a whole different understanding. You no longer are a visitor out there. You have been invited into the world of the land, if you want to call it that. But when you're out in the forest and you're there, or you're on the ocean, or you're on the beach, or you're up on the side of that hill, those kinds of experiences really tend to show why our ancestors lived and worked and played in the fashion that they did. They had moved, they were literally one with the land. The way that so many people are right now, and I've learned this because I've taken out thousands of people into the parks and out into the land, or the forest, as people say, that people aren't ready for it. They're visiting. It's like walking into a museum. It's the equivalent of that. They walk in, they look around, they go, oh yeah, this is very nice, but they're not ready for it either. This is part of the training in the old days, is you have to be ready. The other part of it is you have to be ready to die, because that's the training, life and death. It's all part of it. And so in listening to the land, it's by actually being there, more so than just in a figuratively way of saying, I'm listening to the land. You got to touch it, feel it, be it, and be ready to die there, because that's what listening to the land is. In going out hunting, I have come across lots of the old culturally modified trees way up on top of mountains. Now, thinking about that, so the moms, the kids would have to leave their village, which is usually down by the ocean, and walk all the way back out there. And in walking out there with their kids, and you think of nowadays how much effort and time it is to bundle up your child, take them down to the grocery store, him or her, and then back home, all the process that takes. And how inconvenienced we often say we are. Now, in the days before all those conveniences, think of the work. These people are going out, the people were going out and they were taking the children. And the children had to be self-sufficient because mom was worried about other kinds of things as well. Now, if you think that the moms are doing that, that's huge in that consideration of their environment. So if I were to say people need to listen to the land, they need to really experientially listen to the land. And the water, you know, to wherever they are out there, because then after once being miserable out there, you start looking around with a completely different eye. So that's what I would say. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. There's so much there that I can touch on and add to, and I'm really glad this is being recorded so I could think more about this later as well. And you know, one thing that really stood out to me from what you said was you know, being willing to be surprised, you know, and let go of expectations and know what you're walking into. And you know, when you go outside on the land, you have to step out of that comfort to really be there and listen. So I really appreciate what you shared. Beangka, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I just had some reflections on that question, and some of my more recent experiences in, I don't know, the last 6 to 12 months have really made me think about taking action. So just a thought on the I guess statement, listening to the land. I think we need to remember that we're a part of the landscape and we're an active part of that. And from like a Euro-Western perspective, we often place ourselves outside of that. But from the perspective of many Indigenous people, we're a part of that circle, and we've managed these lands that way since time immemorial. And Camas meadows, Claw meadows, the active management of them through prescribed fire and selective harvest goes back more than 10,000 years ago, which is a long time. It predates the pyramids, it predates Mesopotamia, and those ecosystems existed so vastly because of those management practices. And we need to remember that, like, the first peoples here, you know, the elders that are here and still carry that knowledge about how to manage these places. We need to listen to those people, and when we're out doing restoration projects, or we're managing any type of like land or water, those perspectives are so important, and we need to take action like based on those ways of managing places. I think it's so easy to kind of fall into the observe and protect mode, and I think we need to do more than observe and protect. Like, First Nations people, their knowledge and their perspectives need to be included, and work people are doing, and remember that we're a part of that ecosystem. And then another thought that I had, thinking about, listening to the land. Yes, like we need to listen, but we need to like do both at the same time. One doesn't exclude the other, so action doesn't exclude listening. And we can do that in many ways. Like Sarah spoke to things that you can do as an individual, but the system is larger than us that we're working in. And so there's also things, within large organizations or decision-making bodies. And all of the people in this space find ourselves somehow working as individuals in those systems, and we need to do more within our own power within the system. And something that I've experienced in the last 6 months is that, when we're up against systems that aren't working, it can become really tiring very quickly. And an individual who shows up, at work or wherever it is where there's some decision-making power over how land is managed, we can go from being inspired and wanting to change a system to tired very quickly. And I just want to remind people that, like if you're a manager in an organization, you have some power to decide to make changes. Like we often, put up our own barriers to doing more. And so, I just want to invite people to, yes, like please listen, but like the world and the land has been telling us for a long time that we need to change the way we are doing things, and that like each of us have our own power within these greater systems to do more. So listen, but like also take action and include yourself in the landscape.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Beangka. And I think you bring up such an important part. And listening is not a passive thing. When you're listening to someone, it's a response. You're responding. And so true listening would be responding to what the land is telling you, and it does require action. And both those things need to go hand in hand. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward. And that connection with land is yourself. And so it's not, it has a different weight there when you see yourself as connected with land and not as a separate thing. You are a part of it. So thank you for that. Sarah, would you like to share?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the plants really thrive when you give them attention and you caretake them. For example, when you prune an apple tree, it's more productive and it's happier. So yeah, we're not separate from the land. We've had this tradition of, being very hands-on and tactile with our plant relatives. But what Mark was saying about, being cold and wet outside, that was my exact experience yesterday in SNIDÐEÐEÐ�. So we had a group down doing restoration, and even with all my modern garb, I was still soaking wet. And usually I'm like pretty positive when I'm out working, but yesterday I was just, I couldn't get past my uncomfortableness. But at the end of the day, you feel really humbled, and it reminds you that, the land and nature is really powerful. So that was just a reflection that came to me, and I was kind of smiling about it because I was a little bit miserable, but I'm always grateful to be out there. Like if you've never been to SNIDÐEÐEÐ�, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful little inlet, and it's getting more and more beautiful every week when we're down there doing restoration. But I wanted to acknowledge that, some Indigenous folks and even urban people don't have access to these green spaces. Mark was saying, in Lekwungen territory in Victoria, it's pretty urban, and that's kind of social injustice because we, as Indigenous people, we don't have access to these places to harvest. I've grown up in Pat Bay my whole life, and I've never been able to harvest the clams out there. Like me and my sisters used to harvest them for fun, but we would never be able to eat them because of the contamination, and that's always been kind of a hole that's been missing in me. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge, like, we do kind of romanticize the land, but some people don't even have access to it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then regarding listening to the land, I just wanted to also acknowledge that traditionally that's how SÄNEĆ culture has been formed. And so the land informs our worldview. We have a 13 moon calendar. So we live seasonally and we're guided by the moon. So for example, in February and March, it's the Wuckus moon or the frog moon. And this is when we start hearing the frogs, awaken from their sleep, from hibernation. And it tells us that spring is on its way and winter is ending. And so from there, we'll start doing kind of more spring activities, depending on what's going on the landscape. But that is also changing because things are happening earlier or later and climate change is affecting that. So that's disrupting culture. And then also even the language is informed by the land. So I said the Wuckus moon, which is the frog moon. Wuckus is frog in SÄNÄC, and that's what we heard the frog saying. Instead of ribbit, they were saying Wuckus. Or Squattaw is raven. It's very onomatopoeia. And then there's a creek in SNIDÐEÐEEÐ called Huachacha, and that's the sound that the creek makes when it's kind of flowing. So that was just my reflection on what listening to the land means in a traditional context. Lajah.
Thanks, Sarah, and I really appreciate you bringing forward that bit around, not everyone has access to that connection with land. And I think that's really important to notice. And even within my own practice, doing counseling work, I have a little bowl on my table with a bunch of different pieces of nature, things I've collected. And every student that comes in, that is the main centerpiece if I work with them, is that we can have the full conversation and do the whole counseling session based off the things in that bowl. And every single time it just makes me upset that I can't actually take them so far and actually have an experience like Mark was talking about that's fully on the land and separated, from this little box of an office I have. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward. And I think that's a really good transition to our next question, because another thing that I really think about when I talk about listening is something that's been told to me, is that you need to also be listening to the people that have already been listening, right? And honor the people that have been listening for quite some time now. And those like our elders and knowledge keepers and teachers within that. So I wanted to make this last question focus on what community consultation and collaboration looks like. And I hear that word being thrown around quite a bit within the work that people do, but I'm not sure if not everyone has had the opportunity to really think about what that means for them in their work and really think about who they're accountable to when they say they're doing that work. So I wanted to ask, within your eyes, what has community collaboration looked like within your work in your community, and what would you want it to look like? And I say collaboration because I think that it's a little bit further than just consultation. It's truly collaborating with people from the beginning and before projects are even put forward, and holds more meaning there for me. So I will hand it to you, Sarah, if you don't mind starting for that one.
So the question is, what does collaboration look like, or what kind of efforts are we?
Yeah, it could either be what you've seen for community collaboration within your work, or what would you want it to look like? What would be your suggestions for people in this group who are doing this work? What can they do to collaborate with communities that you're working with?
So earlier I alluded to doing restoration in SNIDÐEÐEEÐ, and we have many groups and volunteers and classes come down to work with us. And that's a really good collaborative effort because we have a very small crew. So it's really helpful for big groups of people to come down and help us out and heal the land, but build connections with each other and with this place. You'll hear me advocate for restoration this whole time because that's what I truly believe in, and that's the practice that I do. So that's been a really, really valuable aspect of this work, is having people come together, work together as a collective, and like I said, get something tangible done. And it also helps, settlers build relationship with this place. Even like Indigenous people as well, like speaking for myself, it's really grounded me in this place and solidifies my identity. And it's been really great meeting people and all that. We also, like I mentioned, we have school groups come down, and especially from the tribal school, having the kids come down and being in their home village and helping heal it and just being together outside has been really great as well. I'm conducting a project in Tseycum on my family's land. We're taking all the we're attempting to take all the ivy out of the forest back here. And I've had this dream for a few years now. It's only come to fruition because people have been coming out and volunteering with me. And since the summer, we've divined like hundreds of trees. And that's a dream come true. Like I never would have done that. I've never could have done that by myself. So I feel like working together is a really valuable thing for us to do. You know, it's nice to be around like-minded people. And yeah, it's been a great experience. I was going to say something else, but it slipped my mind. I'll let you know if I remember it. Aishka.
Thank you. One thing that I really hear from what you say is like creating that community, and a community not just with the people that are like-minded, but also with the land. And you know, restoration is an opportunity to physically do something that's really tangible, but it's also healing in that sense too, where you're also getting that connection. So I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to do that collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, one more thing that I wanted to mention is that when we do have groups down come to SNIDÐEÐEEÐ�, or I'm in, you know, a discussion like this or at the institution like UVic, people are always talking about decolonizing. And it's such a big concept that nobody can really define. And so I always advocate for like physically decolonizing. So Lajah, you mentioned earlier, like when you take away these invasive plants, these native plants can thrive and the ecosystem kind of becomes balanced again. So that's what I would recommend if anyone's looking to decolonize. Like even if you don't have a giant forest to take ivy out of, just buy native plants and put them on your patio or in your yard, and you're creating habitat for, you know, indigenous pollinators. And I feel like decolonizing is it's not just one thing. So that's one of the ways we can do that.
I really appreciate that. And when you talk about decolonizing, and when I often hear it, it's on such a big level and on an institutional level. And so I appreciate you breaking that down and showing like how that can actually look in day-to-day lives, and how that can be something that you do on your own as well. Thank you. Beangka, if I could pass it to you next.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts about collaborating, I guess on different levels. Like Sarah's mentioning, tangible things that, you know, individuals can do, you know, by showing up. So, you know, as an individual, how do you show up and support work, you know, on the land and water, like show up for Kano? And I think that part's really important, and it's really helped the success of some of the First Nations led restoration projects. Sarah's mentioning one, SNÍIDÐEEÐ Resiliency Project, and you know, the work she's done in her own community. For myself, when people show up and help with some of my projects, like I kind of have like a legacy project from Project Reclaim, which is the Sartlet Pollinator Meadow. And I really couldn't do the work if people didn't show up and support it physically. So that's something, you know, that many of us can do in different ways. I also think about the importance of getting out to our traditional territories that are a bit further away. And I've spent a lot of time, like growing up, going to Main Island. That's where my family often goes, and really realized this summer that there's so many other islands. And for the first time, I was able to go to it was Cabbage Island, and right beside it was Tumbo Island, and the traditional place name in Sinchothan is Tamosing, and Tamosing is my dad's name. And I had never seen it, and I actually haven't stepped foot on it. I've seen it from the water, and I just think that with all of the people in Victoria or Greater Victoria area, and you know, how many people have like resources, I think that we need to share those resources more generously, so that there's more opportunity for people to connect to those places where it takes a certain amount of privilege to get to. And you know, if you have that resourcing, just to share it. And find out how you can share it, because you never know. Like, you might think that you can't do anything, but you really can. And yeah, I think that that part is important. And then just on your point of moving away from consultation and engagement, I think to be able to move away from that, First Nations people need to be leading the work. And I jotted down a sentence that said, "Who asked for this work to be done?" I think we need, on the point of listening, like, what are the wishes of the local nations here and how they want this land to be managed, and to move away from consultation and engagement. Those voices need to be amplified. And, the work that like the local nations want to have happen, like, it needs to be resourced. And, we can't expect small nations to take on work without resourcing. And there should be resourcing for the work that they want to happen. So we need to do better to do that, to move away from consultation and engagement. And some of the more successful, I guess, projects I've seen have come when it was nation-led and nation-driven. I know that that's not always possible, and that, there are lots of different scenarios where, you still have to follow like consultation and engagement. But, when you are doing that process and people are asking for things to be done, I think we need to make that extra effort, even if it means doing something off the side of your desk, or doing something outside of the scope of your job, or including like some of those wishes, even if it doesn't quite fit with your own image of what needs to happen. I think, answering those requests is really important. And yeah, just to really center like First Nations leadership, I think is important for collaborating. And so I guess those are the kind of two different perspectives on what collaboration looks like.
Thank you. There's so much there, and the two themes that really jump out from what you said that could be so perfectly applied to this group is, like, one, looking at the resources you have and within your organization, and maybe look at the assets that you have and how can that be shared, and how do you have abundance in one area that you can be sharing with the local nations, and trying to ask what is it that you need and see what within your own organization what you have. But then the other thing too that I think is really important that I was hoping to touch on was, collaboration is before projects are even decided, before action is taken. You need to be doing that process and starting it and asking what's needed, what projects should be taken on, rather than afterwards asking for support. And I think that that is a really, really important takeaway, and I really hope people listen to that. So thank you. And Mark, if I could pass it over to you next. Oh, you'll just have to unmute yourself. You'll have to, the little button on the left side thing.
Yes.
You're good. Perfect.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. Because I've worked in the schools and I've watched lots of projects be floated through the schools for, we must take on a park, or we have to change something in our schoolyard, or we want to make ourselves more environmentally friendly. We talk about I hear you talking about collaboration, all those kinds of things. I've watched a lot of things literally come crashing down, big waves of action. People get motivated, do it, and then it slowly fades away. COVID has been a perfect example of how human beings are. We look at the beginning of COVID, and like 2 years ago, and they were saying we have to shut down the world and we have to do this. And you look at what happened here in BC, Canada, BC, Victoria, and you watch how, yes, everybody rallied to it. Yes, we must do this. And they held it together for a little while. But pretty soon, not too long after, after people, Dr. Bonnie Henry says, yes, I think we have hit that plateau. We are flattening that curve. All of a sudden, things all went to pot, as they say. All of a sudden, things just started falling apart. With that, humans we don't like to act on things unless there's a major crisis and that crisis is affecting us. Unless it is threatening us. We look at the other day, everybody running to the ash pumps. So there was a threat and people took action. They said, oh my gosh, we have to go and buy up all the groceries. We must act. And it's all about, again, self-preservation. And for the world, for our Victoria in general, to change the ideas of colonization, to do all those kinds of, it's not threatening enough yet. It isn't threatening enough. Even with the floods, it's all the flooding that's happened, West Saanich Road washing out, people's basements flooding out, the Malahat. People very quickly jump back into, all right, we have to get that road through. They don't take it upon themselves of, this is a warning sign. Over the years, I have looked at many, many different programs that are out there. After World War I, one of the generals there says, the people who survived, who were able to do things, were people who had been living on the land. And so he put together an organization that would work on preserving the land of your developing community, doing all that. And that's Lord Baden-Powell. He put together Boy Scouts. And that's what Boy Scouts is all about. It's not about paramilitary organizations and we must do this. He was about people understanding each other and the world around them and being able to live with that world, because those are the ones who survived in the trenches in World War I. Other groups have come around. Mom was in the Women's Institute, and that was an organization that was put together to help preserve the world around. That was after, that was during the Depression. And so there was a whole thing around that. World War II actually had things that were called the Victory Gardens. People had to grow food for people overseas. So everybody had to do that, everybody, to help those places survive. So these programs, these processes that we're looking at is nothing new. It's just the fact that people quickly go, once we're comfortable, we don't really care. Right now, well, who is it? Just come on. It escaped me. The program that she runs, she has done is Roots and Shoots, Jane Goodall. And she has a whole program that goes through the schools, for the community, all about getting people connected to the world around them, because she understood how much our lives, how much colonialism, business, mining practices were affecting the forests. Well, Africa. And so how our global needs are impacting certain areas. We here in Victoria, prior to the colonization, so 1843, when Sir James Douglas arrived, up until that point, we were relatively self-sufficient, but still dependent on other groups around. After they came, Victoria has never, ever, ever been self-sufficient. There are pictures down on Yates Street of produce, boxes and boxes and boxes of produce that were being brought in from California so that the colonists could survive. Dandelions in themselves, dandelions, chickens, dogs, all those domestic foods were brought here. So Victoria, after 1843, has never been independent. We still aren't. We're even less so. Our electricity comes from the mainland. We don't produce our own, nothing. There's organizations around right now that provide and do things. We look at the Victoria Fish and Game and people go, oh yeah, that's a hunting group. But no, Victoria Fish and Game, those people are worried about the fish and game. And so they're a big organization that will lobby to areas of politicians in regards to preserving areas. The BC Wildlife Federation, that is again comprised of a lot of hunters and fishermen and hikers and outdoorsmen, have been doing a wetlands project for years and years and years, way before it's been popular. They are going out all around areas. They also have programs that encourage children, women, other people to go out and learn about the land. They have programs about that. There's another program that slips my brain right now, but there are already existing programs out there that we aren't acknowledging because again, they're quiet. They don't go out and ring their own bells and toot their horns and all this. They quietly go about working on stream restoration, doing things. The Scouts and Girl Guides, so the Scout camp, Camp Bernard, they're doing amazing things out there. But again, people aren't acknowledging because they don't make all the noise. So looking at a lot of this, reinventing the wheel or reinventing the mousetrap has, always ended up coming back to just variations of what has already been done. So one of the things I would say is look, as opposed to reforming committees and commissions and all that kind of stuff, see what's already out there, put your hand in it, get involved with that, see what other things that they do. Our railways right now, our railway is a fine example. It's been down for what, 15 years? Each area has to have its own committee. And the reason why it's not getting going is because each committee redoes a new study every year. It's stupid. So I would say look at what you can get involved with, or look at what you can do yourself, or maybe get a neighbor involved with, or your kids, or something like that. Start small. Don't look for money. Just start small, do what you can do. Because, you know, the trying to do the big government organization, yes, it's nice. It gets you lauded by lots of people out there, but start small. I like what the Fort Rod Hill has done in regards to their whole gardening thing out there. It's amazing. They've got camas out there. Camas and miner's lettuce I've never seen so huge. It's amazing. But they're very quiet. Not many people know about it. And they're reforesting. They are going out, they're partnering with CRD to take some of those plants and replant areas or reforest areas. It's quite amazing. Anyhow, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. What really stood out to me with what you just said was not wanting to reinvent the wheel. I think that that's really important. And a part of collaboration is, you know, working to show what's working between one another's groups and projects. I do want to honor your time. I know Megan gave me an extra 10 minutes if I needed it to do this panel, knowing that, you know, the conversation is deep and there's a lot here and we could really go on all day about it. And I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we'll have to wrap up for today. And so I just wanted to give one last chance in the last few minutes for the panelists to share any final thoughts of your thoughts on this conversation, or share anything that you want the audience to take away quickly. And I will start with you, Mark.
Thank you for letting me be part of this panel. And thank you for taking this through this part of technology out to a larger audience. Hopefully, this creates a spark for someone or some buddies out there to make a change in this world. Good luck to all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mark. I completely agree. Hoping it sparks something for someone. And Beangka, if you could go next.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really nice to hear from my uncle and Sarah, and also you, Lajah. So I appreciate all of your words. And just thinking about kind of some of the themes and the current climate right now. And I know there's like a certain level of climate dread, and you know, we all want to do something about it, but just a reminder that you know, the best way we can do it is doing it together. So maybe amplifying some of Mark's words, that, you know, we can support each other's work. And yeah, as he said, the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented, and the last thing we need in the world is another nonprofit. I don't know if you want to dive into that, but I think there's hundreds of nonprofits in Victoria. So supporting existing things, I think, is really valuable. And just taking the time to, as he said too, like there's people out there doing the work that are quiet about it. And you know, I'm only one person out of many people doing good work in Victoria, and just one perspective. So I'm really glad that I was able to contribute, and thanks for having me. But yeah, just to get out there and hear more perspectives, and as the theme is listening. So I'd like to invite myself and invite you to do like the same thing, to hear more perspectives and support good work happening in our communities.
Thank you, Beangka. Yes, I am hoping it's just the beginning of this and it sparks some further conversations around this for other people to keep doing this learning and keep talking to people. And Sarah, I'll pass it to you next.
Ajka for having me. Thank you, Beangka and Mark, for your words as well, and Lajah for your excellent facilitation. It was really great to just have this conversation. I'm going to do a shameless plug for PEPÁաժEÄ HÁUTW. I'll add our website in the chat, but we are not for profit. And yeah, I kind of snickered when Beangka said we don't need more of those because, you know, when you're grant funded, you kind of have a rough go at accessing funds. So whether you want to like financially contribute or come out to SNIDÐEÐEEÐ� or any of our restoration sites and help us, just reach out anytime, and we're happy to accommodate for anyone who wants to learn and help us. So yeah, Ajka for that. And it was a really great conversation. So thank you for having me. Ajka.
Ajka, Sarah. Thank you. I hold my hands up for everyone that came here today and to the panelists. I deeply am feeling so much gratitude and inspiration through this conversation. And I wish it could be a whole day event just doing this conversation. And sadly, I have to wrap up. So I will pass it back to you, Asiya. And deeply, again, thank you for showing up and thank you for doing this work. And I encourage you to also go out and go for a nature walk and see that as a teacher or a workshop as equal as the ones that you're doing for the rest of your day, and take that time to be on the land as you're continuing this event. So thank you, and I'll hand it back to you, Asiya.